Each person has just, candidate has actually just drawn a number, and the order will be in response tonight. Mr. Paul Geddes, Mr. Shane Kennedy, Mr. Douglas Horn, and Mr. Chris Wilson will be speaking in that order throughout the evening. Each candidate will have an opportunity to have a 3-minute opening remark. Then we will be taking questions that the Chamber of Commerce Policy Committee has actually presented to us. You'll have an opportunity to ask questions yourself. The members of the Chamber, you see Mike at the back, big tall guy with a blue shirt on. He's going to be handing out cards so that you can write your questions down. I will be going through them as the candidates are responding to their responses of the questions. As I said, they will have 1 minute to respond to each question. At approximately 8:50, we're going to end the open question and answer period. And all candidates will be given 2 minutes for a final statement. And that final statement will be in reverse order from the way they presented throughout the evening. So, as I said, the opening... Go right ahead.
Speak from here, right there.
Right there. You've got a microphone?
Greetings. Can you hear me? My name is Paul Geddes. I've lived in Coquitlam for 20 years. I moved into a house 3 weeks before my first daughter was born. And I've grown up in this community of Vancouver. I stand for the Libertarian Party, which means we believe in liberty. Not just personal liberty, but also economic liberty. So we don't quite fit into the usual left-right spectrum that the other candidates will have. We agree with the NDP types that your personal life is your own, that you should be allowed to adjust what you want to adjust, that you get to marry who you want to marry, and that you get to live the life you want to live and die when you want to die. And we also agree with the Conservatives in that we believe in economic liberty. We believe in a free market. We think that people who get to keep what they earn are more productive, and we don't like lots of government rules interfering in the trade between individuals. So, social liberty and also economic liberty both. That means we disagree completely with the NDP on economics, and we disagree completely with Conservatives on personal liberties. Now, I want to point out just a couple of things. We've got a 30-plank platform. There are copies at the back if you want to look at it. I want to emphasize the choice in healthcare. The world is just too complicated. We're all different. We have different likes, different desires, different needs. And there's no way that we can fit into a cookie-cutter, lowest common denominator government service. Just imagine if the NDP were running the restaurants in Vancouver. All the different groups would get together. You've got the workers, you've got the owners, you've got the clients, and they all sit down and decide, let's vote for what type of restaurant meals we should have. And let's figure out what quality we should have, and let's figure out what each person should have, and it should be all equal. Well, it would be horrible. Well, why do we want to do that with our education system and our healthcare system? It doesn't work. People are different. We want more variety. We don't want a single-tier medical system. We want lots and lots of tiers. About 5 million people now in BC. We should have at least 5 million tiers. So I hope you would vote for a Libertarian candidate. Tell them that you don't want other people to run your life. You don't want to run other people's lives either. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would just ask the candidates if they could actually speak to the microphone because the people in the back can't hear you.
So don't stand up.
Don't stand up. Stay seated.
My name is Shane Kennedy. I'm your BC Conservative candidate. For too long, British Columbians have been trapped in a two-party system with the Liberals on the far right and the NDP on the far left. Now that both parties are committed to running up a deficit that our children are going to have to pay for someday, I don't really see a difference between the two parties. Now, according to the polls, we're going to believe those, Adrian Dix is going to be the next premier of this province, so the people of this riding have a hard decision to make. You can vote for the NDP and send another backbencher to Victoria and give Adrian Dix an even bigger mandate to do what he wants to do, which we really don't know what he wants to do. You can vote for a Liberal candidate, and what that basically says is you're supporting all the scandals of the last 2 years. You're supporting the idea that they were spent on the budget, and they haven't put together social programs properly. Or you can vote for me. I'm the only candidate here tonight that's prepared to put the needs of this riding first before party loyalty and before political aspirations. Now, why would you believe me saying that? Because I'm going to lay my cards on the table. A lot of the candidates will talk about big ideas and big pictures. I'm going to say specifically what I'm going to do if I'm elected. Some of these things are bigger issues that I can't achieve on my own, but some things I can do automatically. First, I will hold town hall meetings in our riding every 4 months. I will post all of my expenses on a monthly basis on my website. I will freeze my salary during my term in office. I support a referendum on the legalization of marijuana. Now, the Liberals and the NDP will tell you this is a federal issue, but I'm telling you that this is an issue right here in Coquitlam Mountain. I will work to find savings within government to prevent further tax increases. I'm committed to dismantling the Pacific Carbon Trust and removing the carbon tax within 4 years, and I support the $10 a day child care program. Please remember, you don't have to vote for the NDP to get rid of the Liberals. Now you have an actual choice. You can vote for the Conservatives. You can vote for me, Shane Kennedy. Thank you.
Mr. Douglas Horn?
Great, well, thank you so much, and thank you everyone for being here tonight. It's been a great pleasure over the last 4 years of representing this riding in the legislature in Victoria. And I think that as the candidates have said here tonight, there is a very important choice before us all, and this is a choice that's going to affect all of our futures. This is a choice about how British Columbia will be run over the next 4 years. It's a choice about understanding really what is important to British Columbians. And I can say I was the chair of the Finance Committee last fall, and actually one of my proudest achievements as my time being elected, because I think quite frankly people are tired of a lot of the partisan bickering about a lot of the partisan sort of back and forth. And last fall, for the first time in many of the clerks' recollection, and they actually couldn't remember the last time, we actually had a unanimous report of the Finance Committee. So all of the opposition members, all the NDP members, and all of the government members all voted in favor of the Finance Committee's report. And the number one recommendation of that Finance Committee report was that we balance the budget. And I think, even in this room, the importance of balancing our budget, the importance of living within our means, the importance of not spending more than we bring in is of paramount importance, and having the choices and having the opportunities and having the things that each of us really want for ourselves, for our families, and for future generations. And it's also very, very important. One of the things that I've tried very hard in the first 4 years of my time in Victoria is working together with different levels of government. I think sometimes it's forgotten that we're all elected by the same people. It's the same people that elect the mayor of Coquitlam, is elect the MLA, is elect our members of parliament. And all too often we sort of point fingers and we say, that person's responsible, that person's responsible, and we don't work together to really bring what's necessary to the local area and what's necessary to really build our community. And I'm proud of, we finally got the log jam on the Evergreen line done, and that certainly wasn't all my effort, but it was the fact that we actually worked together. I can tell you with some of the things on the school board as well, we're moving forward with new schools and things, and it's about building the community. And I really look forward to having this debate this evening. I thank you so much for being here, and I look forward to talking more about the issues that are important to both myself and to our local community.
Mr. Chris Wilson.
Well, I want to thank all of you for coming here too, to hear the real leaders debate. I also want to thank the Chamber for creating this opportunity, and thank you all for participating in the political process. We need more people to make the effort to come out and participate in things like this, so congratulations to you. I'm going to cut to the chase here, and I actually agree with Doug. This election is about choices, but I look at it a little bit differently. It's about a choice between the same ineffective and irresponsible Liberal policies, or about change for the better. It's a choice between an out-of-touch government that doesn't listen to people and criticizes us when we say we're going to consult, and the NDP, who will actually listen to the people and respond to what their concerns are. And it's a choice between HST and BC Rail-like surprises and quick wins, or open, transparent, responsible government. I have a strong track record of bringing positive change to our community through my continued involvement with organizations like Share Family Community Services, the Chamber of Commerce, Rotary Club, the Homelessness and Housing Task Group. And I think I've got the trust of the people that I've been representing in those areas. I have a very varied business and non-profit experience. I've owned 2 or 3 different businesses in my life. I own investment properties. I created a national nonprofit association that is still in operation today with a budget of over $2 million that I'm very proud of. And as a fellow chamber member, small business person, I know just how hard all of you work and how much you care about your employees. And I commit to you that I'll work just as hard for you and I'll care just as much for you as you do for your employees. Because my goal is to be the most hardworking, trustworthy, and effective representative this community's ever had. I totally believe in free enterprise, but I believe in responsible free enterprise. We haven't had that in a while. I don't necessarily believe that government can create jobs. I believe government creates an environment where business can create jobs. And my commitment to you is that I'll do everything I can to ensure that your business thrives, that you and your family thrives, your employees thrive, and this community thrives. Thank you very much.
Thank you, gentlemen. The Tri-Cities Chamber of Commerce has identified that transportation matters have been top of mind for our particular region. I'm going to direct the questions in order. Mr. Geddes is going to go first. Mr. Geddes, do you support the governance model of TransLink? If not, what changes would you or your party advocate? Sorry, you have 1 minute to respond.
Okay, I was involved in 1984 when it wasn't TransLink at the time, but the bus service went on strike. And so a group of friends and I got a bus and we went up and down Broadway picking people up. I don't understand why we can't have private alternatives here in Vancouver. I would let any private company that wants to use that bus stop, and let's see if we get jitneys or taxis. Let's deregulate transportation so that all kinds of alternatives are out there. I really hate the idea of a group sitting down and planning for everybody. This economy is too complicated. It's okay. Again, how can a government planner know exactly where you want to get off and where you want to get off the bus? Much better just to leave this alone and let small companies who want to pick up people, deliver them where it's paying to do it. We want the appropriate transportation system, and that's not a top-down government system.
Thank you, Mr. Geddes. Mr. Kennedy?
A short answer, no. I think one of the things we have to look at is really local control again. One of the problems we're having is Transit keeps coming back to us continually saying, listen, we need to build these big projects, but we're not getting the funding that's sufficient for it. So what do? They offload it down to the municipalities. We're going to have to raise your property tax. We're going to have to do a tariff. Somehow the province is going to have to step in and say this is a concentrated effort between municipalities and the provincial government.
Mr. Horn?
Well, this is a perfect example of what I was talking about earlier, and that is different levels of government working together to the benefit of the citizens themselves. And I think that TransLink right now is not being terribly effective at delivering transit to its local residents, and we need to fix that. And one of the things that's important in moving forward with things like transit and other areas is, as Mr. Kennedy's just said, it's about the province stepping in. Well, I can tell you that people in Prince George would prefer not to pay for transit in the Lower Mainland, and yet provincial dollars are collected in both Prince George and the Lower Mainland. So we have to find a model where the dollars are collected from those people that actually use the system, so that we're being fair to all British Columbians. But it's being collected in a way that it really benefits those that are using the service and doesn't really provide too large a burden on others. And there's many ways that we've been looking at road pricing, tolls like we have at Port Mann Bridge. We wouldn't have had at Port Mann Bridge.
Thank you, Mr. Horn. Mr. Wilson?
We don't agree with the way transit is run, and it's interesting that Mr. Horn says that it needs to be fixed because the Liberals were the ones that created the mess in the first place. We would change the governance model. We would first of all consult with the public and do what needs to be done to change it. And we've already proposed that we would use a portion of the carbon tax to improve public transit. At a time when Vancouver's growing, we think it's crazy that transit services is being scaled back in certain areas. If we're going to do something about climate change, get people out of their cars, get them on transit. To me, it just makes sense. To our party, it makes sense. And to most of the people we've talked to, it makes sense.
Thank you. Changing the pace here, we're going to cover an issue regarding minimum wage. The BC Liberals increased the general minimum wage by over $2 recently per hour, an increase of over 24%. And the BC NDP are proposing that if they are elected, the general minimum wage will increase by another $1.75 to $12, and further increased every 6 months by the Canadian Consumer Price Index. If elected, what steps would your government take to protect the over 1 million jobs created in this province by small businesses, enabling those businesses to remain viable without reducing the workforce? Mr. Geddes?
The minimum wage hurts the people that it's designed to help. The people who support the minimum wage say that they want to help the poor people. Well, before the Liberal government made that silly mistake and raised the minimum wage, there were only 2.5% of the population in BC who were at that minimum wage level. We were the second lowest in Canada. Only Alberta was lower. And Newfoundland is about 25% at that minimum wage level. So when we raise the minimum wage, it didn't hurt too many people. But it's going to hurt more and more the further you raise it. Now just think about your groceries. If the superstore decides they're going to raise their minimum price, are you going to buy more food? Of course not. Well, the job is a contract between an employer and an employee. So when the government sets a wage, it's going to be wrong. We should allow people to bargain with each other and come to a mutually advantageous wage rate. Again, the minimum wage hurts the most unfortunate among us, makes them unemployable. It's a terrible policy.
Thank you, Mr. Kennedy.
Well, the BC Conservative Party does support minimum wages. We feel the best way to get control on wages is to actually have good paying, high paying jobs. That will tend up to bring up the market costs. One of the things I find disturbing is that the Liberal government has allowed temporary foreign workers an increase of almost 322% to come in from 2001 to 2011. We started out with 19,000 10 years ago. We're over 46,000 now. One of the problems I see is they're using that to undermine minimum wage instead of doing things like getting rid of the carbon tax, which is a drag on small business, instead of keeping MSP fees that most small business people have to pay for their employees down. It's looking at other ways to try and make it possible for small businesses to survive and pay those competitive wages.
Mr. Horn.
I'll just, on the temporary foreign workers, obviously, I'm certain Mr. Kennedy knows this, but it's actually a federal program. But the issue of minimum wage, I think, is an important one. And actually, as Paul said, it's a very difficult balancing act because, you know, if you get it wrong, you really are hurting the people that are most affected and really at the most vulnerable stage. Because, you know, the problem is if you have a minimum wage that's too high, more people simply aren't hired. And so you actually decrease employment, decrease your economy, and make it so that the people that really need those jobs aren't getting them. By the same token, you need to make sure that there is that floor there. So this is a very important issue. Trying to get it right all the time is a very difficult one. Obviously, we increased the minimum wage recently. You know, I think that we need to constantly be vigilant and be looking at what the minimum wage is, but I think that it really is important.
Thank you, Mr. Horn. Mr. Wilson.
We believe in fair wages. We were disappointed that it took the Liberals so long to increase the minimum wage this last time, and we applauded Christy Clark when she did. We also are very sensitive to the needs of business, and as a small business person, I'm very sensitive as well. We were warned that last time the minimum wage was increased, that it would really destroy jobs in our community, and in fact, it seems like things have worked out fairly well. We have the highest cost of living in Canada. We need to pay people properly. We need to do something to keep people, or to to bring people out of poverty, and that's why we believe that the minimum wage needs to be increased.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. Moving on to taxation. Corporate capital tax. Now, forgive me, I have to read a little bit of a segue that the policy committee wrote. In the NDP platform, Mr. Dix has clearly stated that a capital tax will be applied to banks and credit unions. While this might appear to receive positive response given the public outcry over bank executive salaries, the financial impact on credit unions and the province could be significant. The 2010 budget brought in 100% deposit guarantees for the provincial credit unions, allowing them to compete more readily against the big banks. That said, many of the remaining 60 credit unions in the province will see this new tax erode profits that are paid as dividends to their membership or invested back into our local communities by over 20%. The impact will be reduced community contributions, dividends to membership will drop, and in some cases will place the credit unions and its employees in financial jeopardy, causing a run on funds and calls for the province to step forward to support on their deposit guarantees. So gentlemen, what steps would your government take to protect these important, well-paying jobs, as well as millions of dollars that these companies inject into our local communities every year? Mr. Geddes?
And Christian. Well, as you can guess, libertarians don't like taxes very much. We're interested in finding voluntary ways of getting and providing the services that we want. That's why we favor user pay. Now, some taxes are much worse than other taxes. The most painful type of tax is a tax on companies. The capital tax is one of those. They cause lots of harm. The second worst tax would be income tax. The least painful tax would be a consumption tax. It's not that I favor consumption tax. I don't like them either. I prefer, again, you pay for the services that you want directly, and that way the people who think of providing them will find innovative ways of providing them for their willing customers. So, I don't know. Your question is kind of like, do I want to chop off a finger or do I want to chop off an arm? No, I don't want to chop off either one, but I would prefer a consumption tax over a capital tax.
Thank you. Mr. Kennedy?
Mr. Dix is being wrong-headed about this. I know it's always very easy to play up bankers as the bogeyman. They make large profits on that, and that's what we're led to believe. But they don't really see the impact this will have on credit unions and the smaller institutions. Most of you are all business people. I know when I go to see my banker, she's not a bogeyman. She's there to help me. She's there to come up with an equitable deal. We'd resist any move to implement this by the NDP.
Thank you. Mr. Horn?
So I think this is a very important issue because it goes to the crux of the decision that everyone has before them, and that is, building the economy, building jobs, and creating opportunity for British Columbians. Or basically what we saw during the 1990s where we destroyed all of that. And this is just yet another example of how these types of policies will destroy our economy. And we are completely against the capital tax. And we saw what happened during the 1990s when we had taxes like these. British Columbia, for the first time in its history, became a half-not province. And that's a sad statement. And fortunately, we're through good management, no longer in that position, but this would just take us back there.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson.
I just need to put it in context. We're talking about reinstating a tax that was in place until 2008 and that was phased out as of 2010. This tax is a 1% tax on credit unions, 3% tax on the big banks. It's been well researched. It's been well thought out. It's going to provide a pool of money for reinstating the post-secondary grant program that the Liberals cut. And if by chance it's going to decimate credit unions, I would assume that we would revisit the tax and make changes. But like I say, it's been well thought out. It's going to be used for a very good reason, and it was in place until 2010.
Thank you. Just a further detail that the policy committee, and I have to tell you, I made a mistake. So after each question, after each person in each round of questions, I'm supposed to alternate. You would actually respond.
Thank you.
I'm sorry. So, my bad. So I'll change the rotation. So the next question will be started from Mr. Kennedy. And it's a further question on taxation. And I have to read just a small preamble here. It's about the utilization of corporate capital tax. The NDP platform calls for the direction of the corporate capital tax to fund skills training. This directed form of taxation versus a taxation to general revenue and then distribution to needed areas can lead to a perception of the squeaky wheel receiving funding. Are you in favor of this targeted taxation approach or a more holistic approach that enables available funding to be directed from general revenues as determined by need? So the simple answer, gentlemen, is holistic or general revenue taxation. And Mr. Kennedy?
I guess you keep your choice, so that's good. Yeah, I'll go with the holistic.
You're holistic. Okay, Mr. Horn.
Well, you know, I think it's important to be able to have
It's a holistic or general revenue, sir?
general revenue.
General revenue. Mr. Wilson?
I personally feel general revenue.
General revenue? And Mr. Geddes?
General, look at the corruption that's going to come when
Thank you, Mr. Geddes.
think about the film industry subsidies.
I appreciate
Everybody
that.
wants the same thing now.
Thank you, Mr. Geddes. So now I'm going to open the floor to the questions that you've all submitted. You should know that we haven't edited the questions at all. We're just looking for duplication to make sure that everything works out. Mr. Horn is going to respond to the first question. Mr. Horn?
Yes.
And actually, this is directed specifically to you. Okay. Premier Clark ran a red light recently. She admitted that and apologized for that. Do you think character and integrity is important for a candidate, and how do you comment on this incident?
You know, I think it's similar to what we've seen many times, you know, and I honestly believe, and I guess this is where I would agree certainly with some of the other things that the NDP are saying, and that is, it would be nice if we could get politics out of the gutter and stop talking about all of these issues. You know, the difficulty is, you know, you have this issue with the red light camera, you have the issue with the NDP leader who forged a document. You know, the difficulty is it goes back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. I think people work hard for public service. I think people's intentions are honorable, and they're really, all of them are trying. You know, everyone sitting in front of you today, I think, really cares about our province and really wants to make a difference and make things better. And no, I think that it's much more important to talk about the issues that are important for British Columbians.
Thank you. Next question I will direct to Mr. Wilson, and then each candidate will have a chance to respond. How will your government commit to reduce poverty and improve the social determinants of health?
Our plan is to increase the baby bonus for families with children up to 18 years old. We're going to increase the social assistance rates by $20. After that, by the rate of inflation. We're going to focus a lot more on helping people with a handout rather than a handout. So focusing on skills training and education for parents and early childhood education for children, especially in families who are living in poverty.
Thank you. Mr. Geddes?
Well, you can't make the poor rich by reducing the profit opportunities that people can make jobs. It just doesn't work. So, taking from Peter to give to Paul, well, makes Peter a little angry. And it doesn't really help Paul because it teaches him to be irresponsible. So I don't want government money to go to poor people. Essentially, poor people are poor for all kinds of different reasons. And fortunately, Canadians are very generous people. Why doesn't our government trust us to help the people that we want to help? I prefer lots and lots of competing charities, each of them telling us how successful they are, and we'll support the ones that we think work. I just don't think that the government charity method works. It doesn't seem to help the people that it wants to help, and it takes too much from us.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Kennedy.
Oh, sorry, what's next?
Mhm.
Oh, sorry. We're looking at this as an overall approach. One of the things I mentioned earlier was the $10 a day child care program. A lot of people are saying, well, why should I pay to raise someone else's child? But what people don't realize, when you take and put into one part of the system, you reduce in another way. What the $10 a day would help working, like single parents, to get back into the workforce, that would break them up from poverty. Working couples so they can pursue better opportunities. Of course, trade and post-secondary training will be a large part of that. We want to see an increase in terms of funding. The other thing is, overall, a lot of people are paying a lot of taxes. This is what's really driving middle-class families into lower-class brackets. Carbon tax, increases in MSP, anything you can imagine there's a drag on it. It seems this government really loves to live off its taxes.
Great. Mr. Horn?
I actually had a good conversation with a gentleman at the door the other day about this. And it's an issue where if you build the economy, you have more resources in order to support those that need the help. And if you don't build the economy, you don't, pure and simple. And there's lots of opportunities. British Columbia is a very special place, and we have a huge abundance of resources. We have huge opportunities. We have a great, digital film industry and many other things. But we need to make sure that we remove red tape and build our economy, and then we can support those people that really need our help. And that's really the most important thing.
Lean forward. I can't hear you, sorry. Thanks, Ed. Okay, another question, and we're going to start with Mr. Geddes after I read the preamble. BC has the lowest number of nurses, RNs, LPNs, RPNs, and nurse practitioners per 100,000 in population in all of Canada. Along with increasing number of nurses to improve safe patient care, there needs to be strong nursing leadership in the Ministry of Health. Is your government committed to pursuing plans for BC to allow nurses to participate in developing this kind of plan? Mr. Geddes?
I can't tell. It sounds like this is some special interest group calling for some special privileges. I want to deregulate healthcare so that you can talk to a medical practitioner of the type that you think will help you best and be able to find out exactly what they're willing to do for you at a price that you're both willing to agree with. It could be a nurse, it could be a doctor. It should be up to you to decide. I really dislike, again, top-down government planning, which doesn't work. Our lives are too complicated. If you sit and look at go to the MSP website and look at the contract that our government has set with the nurses and the doctors about what exactly they're going to pay for, of course it's not going to work. Fortunately, there are good people there who can get around some of those rules, but they shouldn't have to.
Thank you, and I can remind all you gentlemen to lean forward so that the people can hear you. Mr. Kennedy?
Suggesting Mr. Geddes talked about top-down. What we're saying is we would support consultation with the nurses. They're the frontline staff. They can look at where the problems are, what we need to be looking at. Home care is going to be the continuing problem in this province. As the population ages, we can't put everyone into a hospital or extended care. For the record, of course, the BC Conservative Party supported the practical nurses joining the registered nurses. For some reason, that seemed to be a big debate. They're saying that it's going to drive up the prices of wages for nurses. There's a guarantee would be based on education and practice, so we trust the nurses over some of the elected affairs or health CEOs. So once again, I think we should be talking to people who are there on the front line to see what needs to be changed.
Thanks. Mr. Horn?
Great. Well, I think it's a question of whether you're going to listen to nurses and listen to what's important to them. And one of the things that we did just recently is the head of the nurses union came in and talked about the importance of making LPNs as part of the nurses bargaining unit. As they voted, the LPNs had voted to become part of the nurses union. But we did listen, and we moved forward with that. We've now made it so that we passed it over in council so that they are now part of the bargaining unit. And I can tell you the NDP in the House at that time would be interesting to see if Mr. Wilson would indeed support that move, because his caucus in the House did not. And I think it's important to listen to those that are involved. I also think the other part that's important is to train more nurses, which we're now training more than double what we did before. And you look at facilities like here at Douglas College, where we have incredible facilities and wonderful new great technology to train nurses. I think that's very, very important in the future.
Thank you. Mr. Wilson?
We didn't support it because it was rushed and it was such a good idea. We thought that it deserved a little bit more consultation and time so that all sides were heard. I believe the current system isn't working, and my personal belief is that we need to do more. We need to be a lot more creative, come up with different solutions, and one of those is to have nurses expand their roles in the government. I'm all for that. The current system isn't working. We need more cooperation. We need to do things differently.
Thank you. There's a question on the floor for education from the policy committee, and again, there's a long preamble, and Mr. Kennedy will respond first to this question. The NDP had proposed to increase K-12 funding by $265 million to hire new teachers, counselors, education assistants, and librarians at a time when provincial government debt has reached a new historic high of $45 billion, or $26,000 per BC resident. While the BC Liberals, as part of their balanced budget plan, have announced a new budget that freezes block funding to school districts at $4.7 billion for the second straight year, as school boards grapple with higher utility bills, medical service plan hikes, and pension fund increases. Here in the Tri-Cities, our school district is making drastic cuts to eliminate a projected $12 million deficit. A closer look at the school district's books reflect a long-term systemic problem that neither party has seemed to address. The percentage of management, administration, and teaching labor costs in many school districts is 89.5% in school district 43 alone. And as a percentage of the overall budget has risen to the point where budgets are severely strained, impacting programs, supports, maintenance, and supplies. The burden of offsetting these reductions is being downloaded to parents, leading to an inequitable distribution of resources, depending on the parent income levels, amongst most schools in the district. What is your party's long-term solution to address the crippling effect of these high labor costs are having on our school district budgets?
I think there's a lot of things we can look at. 2 points I'd like to actually make some sidebars. Most of the members of the Coquitlam School Board are members of the New Democrats or supported by the New Democrats, so you only need to look at that to see what the future lies with BC. I think it's also humorous that we have the Liberal candidate who recently attended Bramblewood School to hand out a check for $30,000 to say here's for playground equipment, while at the same time his government took $265,000, actually over $265,000 out to give money to the Carbon Trust. One of the things we have to look at is the way as we move into the 21st century, the K-12 curriculum has changed to reflect new technologies in the globalized world. And so we have to look at the strengths to play to that. It's a case where, yes, there needs to be an increase in funding, but we have to split smarter and look at the way that we're going to actually pay for this.
Thank you. Mr. Horn?
Well, I think education funding is something that we need to have a more respectful and better dialogue on. It's one of the issues that I think is most important to all British Columbians. And I look here in our district, and we have some very difficult problems, and those problems are in light of the fact that every single year the budget for our district has gone up, and every single year the number of students in our district has gone down, and yet there's all of these budget pressures every single year. And I think what we have to do is we have to look holistically at the way that we're managing this process and the way that we're moving forward and what the priorities of British Columbians are in their totality. And we have excellent outcomes in education. We have some of the best teachers in the world, and we have some of the best student outcomes in the world. And it's just making certain that we continue to move forward and that we have and continue to achieve those results.
Mr. Wilson?
We definitely need to have a better relationship between the government and the teachers, be a more respectful relationship, and that's what we promised to do. The $265 million, that's over 3 years, just want to clarify. It's one thing for the Liberal government to say that they've increased funding every year, and technically they have, but if your costs are going up 10% every year and your funding is going up 2% every year, a grade 2 child will figure out that pretty soon you're going to have a problem, and that's exactly what's been happening. Costs have been going up much faster than the increased money the government's putting in. And obviously we need to do it more effectively. Obviously we need to be more efficient. That starts with a better relationship with teachers and less waste. The government has wasted over $100 million on information systems that the teachers and counselors have to use. That's been a total failure, and it's going to be wasted because they're going to start a new system. We can't have that kind of waste.
Thank you. Mr. Geddes?
I don't understand why the government treats us like machines. Our children are all different. They have different needs. We should have a great variety of educational experiments. I'm still extremely happy that when my daughters were very young, we found a small Montessori school in a church basement. We scrimped and saved, it was hard. But boy, did they get a good foundation on life. Now, meanwhile, at the government school across the street, for each child that goes to government school, our government takes my taxes and gives them about $7,000 per student. What a colossal waste, after they have free facilities and all this too. I don't think this top-down education monopoly is working for us. We should have more variety. We're all different. We don't eat in the same restaurants. We eat all over the place. And that's what we should have with our educational system.
Thank you. This next question will start with Mr. Mo.
We care deeply about the environment. We care deeply about changing behavior and making certain that the development that we have is sustainable. And I think that's what British Columbians, those are the values that British Columbians also share. And this is what's important to British Columbians, is to see the wealth created, but quite frankly, the wonderful place that we all call home maintained for many generations to come.
Thank you. Mr. Wilson.
We would get rid of the Pacific Carbon Trust. It's just another example of a poorly thought out failed policy that the Liberal government has brought in, and it's not achieving its needs. Money from schools and hospitals are going to pipeline companies and cement companies, and that's not what anybody in this province wants.
Thanks. Mr. Geddes.
Nobel Prize winner Friedrich Hayek once had a little book called The Fatal Conceit. And that's exactly what this Carbon Trust program is. Some little group of experts is going to sit down and figure out exactly where we're going to spend our money to try to reduce this thing called carbon, which we don't even know to what extent it's going to hurt us or harm us. It's just ludicrous. Scrap this plan and get these government favorites out of there. I don't understand why the Liberals are trying to do an NDP type thing on this.
Mr. Kennedy.
I'm so very pleased that Mr. Dix has decided to start emulating the Conservative Party. We've been talking for 2 years about getting rid of the Pacific Carbon Trust. And here tonight, Mr. Wilson says that Adrian Dix is considering scrapping it. We've always said we want to get rid of it. And I'm going to say something. Think about this yourself if you think this is a good situation. I don't need to connect the dots to you, but I'll read it to you. The Pacific Carbon Trust takes money out of public institutions, $1 million out of Fraser Healthcare, $265,000 out of the Coquitlam School Board. That money goes to the Pacific Carbon Trust. From there it goes to multinational companies, and many of those multinational companies are big donors to the Liberal Party. I would say if it isn't the truth, connect the dots.
Thank you. Changing pace here a little bit about election payments. We're going to start this one with Mr. Wilson. How do each candidate feel about taxpayer-funded elections and partisan advertisements? Mr. Wilson?
We would get rid of partisan ads. We would emulate what Ontario's done in terms of having an independent panel that looks at all government advertising. And that panel, the estimate was 20% of government ads that we see Liberals have ran would actually be considered okay. In terms of government-funded elections, right now the government's funding this election like crazy through the tax credits that everybody gets. We don't necessarily think that's the best way. We don't necessarily think government giving money to parties to run elections is the best way. We would consult. We would put together a panel to try to figure out what the best way to deal with it is. But to have unions and large corporations be the ones funding government, or be the ones funding campaigns, to us doesn't make sense.
Thank you. Mr. Geddes?
What do you think about a group of insiders sitting down and deciding where the funds of the government will go to which political parties? This is called a cartel. We should allow individuals to make the donations that they want to. We're a very tiny party, but we're willing to go into the market and look for your support. We don't want the government to subsidize us. I don't want you to subsidize me. I don't want you to subsidize them either. Let them try to raise their money by themselves. So all these attempts to try to get political reform are usually the insiders trying to get control to make sure that you don't go and get some new voice from outside. They're trying to shut up people like Preston Manning, who started a new party, or Mark Emery, who started a new party, or Mel Hurtig. That's what the purpose of all these rules are. They're trying to keep out new voices. So be very careful about that.
Thank you, Mr. Kennedy.
Our party opposes government advertising in the first place. Over the last 2 years, the Liberal Party has spent $65 million of your money telling you something you already know. BC is the best place in the world to live. We don't believe in having taxpayer-funded credits for political parties. You live and die on your supporters. It's interesting to note that Mr. Horn will probably spend about $70,000 in the selection, Mr. Wilson equivalent amount. I might bring $10,000, but I've only received funding from individuals. I don't get a paycheck from a big union boss. I don't get money from who knows where. So I think one of the things we have to look at is this a fair situation we need to have? And the answer is no. No to credits and no to government advertising.
Thank you, Mr. Horn.
Well, I think it's important that people have the right to give money to a party they feel represents their interests and their goals. And I think that by government funding parties and simply giving them the cash that they need to run an election, I don't think is right. I actually agree with Mr. Geddes that this is about democracy and people being able to choose who it is that represents them and choose not only with hard work that they do themselves, but also with their checkbook and to give a donation and to be part of the process. And so I think that obviously we continually need to look at that, but individual donations and donations from small business I think makes a lot of sense because it's part of our process and it makes it so that those that want to be involved or can be involved.
Thank you. We're moving to the natural resource sector. Another question from our policy committee. And Mr. Geddes, you're going to start this one off, so I'll read the preamble. Abundant natural resources are one of the biggest strengths of our province. Businesses in these industries employ tens of thousands of people in high-paying positions. Much debate has arisen about the role that the extraction of resources or the movement of resources from our other jurisdictions should play in the provincial economy, and job creation with parties appearing to be completely in favor or completely opposed to utilization of these natural resources as a job driver. What actions will your party take to create jobs in the province, either through utilization or movement of natural resources or other means in lieu of this option?
I think it's a pipeline question, isn't it?
Apparently.
Well, we're very lucky again that we have lots of resources. And there are people around the world that want our resources. The libertarian view is that we should have private property rights. So as much as possible, the people who discover these resources and do the hard work of bringing them into the market should get the reward for doing so. The problem with a lot of pipelines is that it goes across territory which is essentially unowned. 95% of the land in BC is owned by all of us, which means it's owned by none of us, which means we have constant political fights about what should we do here, what should we do there. No, the thing to do is to, as much as possible, have the first person to use it, have private property rights to this, and of course this means settlement with the natives who have true hereditary rights to a lot of this area.
Thank you, Mr. Kennedy.
You're probably aware that my party does support building on the resource sector. I could address fracking, that's a big issue, but I think I'm just going to address the pipeline issue since we have limited time. Mr. Dix has done a very good job of demonizing us. We're going to have all these boats zooming along the coastline, crashing everything and just destroying our coastline. But I look at there's two options. Either we can control the pipeline, that gives us control over where the oil is going to be brought out, if it's refined from the bitumen into light crude, or what we can do is allow Alberta to build a roadway up to Alaska and then ship the oil from Anchorage, in which case we're going to have no control over the oil. And if you think those American captains are going to go to deep water when they first pull out, they're going to hug the coast and hit it. I talked about being a bit of a rebel, so I'll stand for the right in here. The only way I would support the pipeline, if I were to vote for it, is if 50% of the new revenues, because it would be new revenues that we get from the royalties, would go into a green fund. That's not party policy, that's my policy.
Thank you, Mr. Horn.
Well, I think this is a very important question because it really goes to fundamentally to how we build our economy and how British Columbia grows in the long term. And that is, we need to have environmental protection in place, but we also need to ensure that we have resource development. British Columbia is a resource-rich province. It's something that we've built British Columbia upon, and it's something that will ensure our futures. And simply sort of off the cuff saying no, that I'm not going to do this, no, that I'm not going to do that, not based on science, not based upon any sort of process in place, Putting a silly process in place that's a kangaroo court, which is what it sounds like the NDP wants to do, is sort of say, well, we're going to say no, but you can still go through a process if you'd like, seems to me to be even sillier. Basically, we need a process in place that protects our environment, ensures that we put the protections in place, but makes certain that we can allow resource development in the province of British Columbia.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson.
We believe in responsible extraction of resources, and we don't think that Vancouver should be an export port for raw bitumen to the rest of the world. It's extremely dangerous, it's very risky, and the science and research hasn't been done on how you clean up a spill of raw bitumen. It sinks, it causes permanent long-term damage, and we don't think the people of the Lower Mainland, and frankly people of BC, want to happen in the Burrard Island, in San Juan Islands, anywhere in our area. We're not against development, we're not against oil and gas. We just think it needs to be done safely with reputable companies. Mr. Horn talks about environmental protection. We don't have a Coast Guard station at Kitts anymore. The Conservatives have watered down all the regulations. A company is only liable for $40 million right now on the cleanup. There's an oil spill. We need stronger regulations before we can approve anything like this.
Thank you. Moving on and back to transportation. We're going to start this with Mr. Kennedy. What is your position on road pricing and tools on both current and new bridges and roadways?
Road pricing is just another tax grab. I'm convinced of that. Tolling bridges, that's always been a tradition in BC, going back to W.A.C. Bennett, or some of you refer to Wacky Bennett. But I think one of the problems, as Diana Watts and Surrey pointed out, it has to be equitable. We ruled a whole new roadway up to Whistler. Okay, there's no toll on that. Yet if you go over the Surrey Bridge right now, like Port Man, you could charge $1.50 each way. That's the discounted price. So I think new projects, yes, certainly we can toll them, but let's keep it equitable. And if someone's having to use it for basic transportation, let's keep the rates low. $1.50, not fair. 25 cents, 50 cents, as Ms. Watts suggests, I think that's equitable.
Thank you, Mr. Horn.
Obviously, having better transportation infrastructure is important to us all. We talk about the Port Man Bridge. Without the toll, we wouldn't have the Highway 1 and Port Man Bridge project. We simply couldn't afford it. It's funny because some of the other candidates talk about the debt level of British Columbia and how our debt's gone up. Well, there's a difference between the debt over the last 10 years and the debt for the 10 years before. The debt for the 10 years before was predominantly from program spending. The debt from the last number of years has been from building hospitals, building roads, building bridges, building schools, building infrastructure and capital that we actually have, that we can touch, that we have for future generations. And that's what's very important, is to make certain that we build and have things available, that we don't simply create debt off of program spending, because of course that's the difference between buying a car or taking a trip to Hawaii. And it's very, very important to understand the difference.
Mr. Wilson.
Whether it's road pricing, whether it's tolls, whether it's higher gas taxes, whatever it is, it has to be fair. When the Boldenier's Bridge was brought in and the tolls were there, we were told that it's only going to be tolled because there's an alternative crossing, which was the Port Man Bridge, an alternative free crossing back then. Well, now we don't have an alternative free crossing, and the tolls are still there. So we were deceived. That's not what we were promised, and it's not fair. Right now, anybody living in Surrey and Langley can pay up to $100 or $1,500 a year more than we're paying. That's not fair. So whatever we decide, it's got to be well thought out. It's got to be across the whole Lower Mainland, and it's got to be fair.
Mr. Geddes.
Our roads and bridges are very expensive to build and very expensive to maintain. I don't believe in a fairy godmother. Someone's got to pay for this. So the question is, do you want to pay for it through taxes, or do you want the users to pay for it? This is a very libertarian idea. Of course the users should pay for it. There are cheap ways of putting transponders in cars to find out who is using what type of road, so that the people who build these roads and maintain them have an incentive to try to innovate and come up with cheap ways of producing the services that consumers want to buy. We don't want my grandmother to pay for a road that only I use. That's unjust. We don't want taxes to pay for these things. Users should pay for these things.
Great. Staying on transportation, We'll start this one with Mr. Horn. What changes, if any, would your party bring to the BC Ferry Corporation and its current model of operation?
I think BC Ferries, we conducted an audit on BC Ferries, and it's a very difficult situation because the costs in BC Ferries are substantial, and the province of British Columbia gives a very large subsidy to BC Ferries on an annual basis. The unfortunate part of it is we devolved BC Ferries off to being a standalone corporation, and I personally believe that the executive salaries paid to BC Ferry are absolutely obscene and ridiculous, and I think that needs to be changed. I think we need to be looking more at the model. I think we also need to be looking more at sort of the infrastructure and transportation between some of the Gulf Islands and some of the other areas where the routes are very difficult. I think it would be hard to have a fixed crossing across to a lot of these places, but quite frankly, fixed crossings between some of the Gulf Islands probably for an economic standpoint would make some sense. I think we need to look at those types of options.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson.
We would put a 2-year freeze on fares for now and do a full review of all the operations. We appreciate that local government did an audit and they've done part of the work for us, which is awesome. But really the ferries are an extension of our highway system, and we need to look a lot more broadly at the role the ferries play, the role that higher fares are having in terms of their revenue generation. Because what we're feeling is the higher the rates go, the lower the people that use those ferries and the lower their overall revenue generation is. Same argument that the Liberals keep making about taxes, well, it's the same thing with ferries. So we want to look at it in a more broad perspective and figure out the best way to move forward, making sure that it stays a part of our transportation system.
Thank you, Mr. Geddes.
I want to answer this the same way I answered the last one. I have no moral obligation to pay for you if you want to live in an expensive location. We used to have competing ferries, and then the people started believing fairy godmothers and said, oh, prices are too high, so they asked the government to keep the prices down. And as a result, the private ferries wanted to stop their service. Then the government stepped in and said, oh, we'll provide it. And the taxpayers have been on the hawk ever since. We want the appropriate service at the appropriate price. And the only way to do that is let the users who get on these ferries pay for the ferries, and they will make sure that they get the right service at the right price that they're willing to pay for it. We don't want taxpayers, innocent taxpayers, to pay for someone else's expensive ferry ride.
Mr. Kennedy.
I don't have too much to add. John Cummings, he said that there will have to be a comprehensive review. Yes, the Liberals have started that. But I find it curious, Mr. Horn has said that he finds the fees being paid to the senior members outrageous. And I wonder if he ever stood in the House to proclaim his outrage over these grossly overpaid executives.
Thank you. Moving on, this will be responded to by Mr. Wilson first. How will each of you, within your party's platforms and promises, ensure young working families have a promising future by keeping taxation low?
This is one of the reasons I'm running, is for young working families. I believe young working families have been given a raw deal, and we need to do a lot more to make sure they have better opportunities. We need cheaper daycare for a start, and we're not exactly sure how we do that. Again, we need to consult, we need to work with business and nonprofits to make sure that we can come up with a daycare plan that works for everybody. Transportation issues, I mean, you name it, there's all kinds of issues that these younger people are dealing with. The other thing that we're trying to do to make it easier for younger families to get established is reinstate the grant program for post-secondary education. Tuition fees have gone up by almost 100% in the last 12 years. The grant program is gone. People are coming out of university with huge student loans, and that's no way to start a family or a life. So we need to do a lot more to help young families. It's not just about taxation.
Mr. Geddes.
There's no free lunch. If you want a government service, you got to find a way to pay for the exact service that you want. And look at our policy platform. It's all about how to find ways of getting the service they want in a voluntary method. So all the other parties seem to promise all kinds of big goodies for us. And that means somewhere down the road, someone's going to reach into your back pocket and take your money from you. So if you really want to reduce taxes, let's find ways of making our services appropriate and cheap at the right price that people want to afford.
Mr. Kennedy?
Mr. Wilson says it's not all about the taxes, but I'm going to have to say it is a lot about the taxes. We seem to pay a disproportionate amount of our money for different services that we don't always utilize. One of the things I'm thinking about at the top of my mind is the carbon tax. I'm not really sure how it's helping the environment, and if that's the only thing that the other three parties can come up with to help the environment, then we're really in a lot of trouble. The carbon tax has a cascading effect. Not only do you see it at the pump, but any goods that you purchase, a lot of times services, you're going to have that marked up. We have pushed for the $10 a day childcare program. We want to look at some way of kind of stopping the rapid increase of the MSP fees. Often we hear the Liberals saying we have the lowest personal taxes available, but they don't mention about all the fees that have been accelerating, and so it's a tax to the back door. We live in a consumer society, whether you like it or not. The Liberals have found a way to really tax the consumer.
Mr. Horn?
Well, I think that's a good thing that we should look at right now, and that is someone who's at the lower end of the income. And as I said, I was the chair of the Finance Committee last fall, and we had group after group after group saying that in order to pay for the $3 billion of new spending that the NDP has now announced, although they haven't announced their entire platform, but in order to pay for that, we need to bring taxes back to 2001 levels. And that's really where we're going, because the other members of the Finance Committee on the NDP side will applaud that. And I'll remind people that someone who makes $18,000 a year in 2001 paid $420 in personal income taxes and paid $762 in MSP premiums. That person today under our government pays 0 personal income taxes and 0 MSP premiums. And that's a huge benefit to someone who makes $18,000 a year. And so, we need to continue to work hard for those in the middle class, but there's the reality of the situation, and then there's the talk. And the reality of the situation is people pay less, especially low-income people pay substantially less.
Thank you, Mr. Horn. On spending money, this question is from the audience. Mr. Geddes, you're going to lead off this one. Where do you and your party put your priorities in order of 1, 2, 3? Creation of new jobs, education, or healthcare?
We don't want the government to spend money on any of those things. They do a terrible job, all of them. We want to free up people to be able to buy the service that they want, the appropriate service at the appropriate price.
Thank you. Mr. Kennedy.
What I'm going to do is a bit of a linkage here. You said to put it into order. Sorry, I forgot my mic here. I'm going to put in order. Yes, we would support spending creation first on new jobs, education, and healthcare. The simple reason is, without the creation of new forms of revenue, without creating new jobs, there can't be any money for education or healthcare. Education will be another driver within the economic system. If we combine those and spend smartly on both of those, we should have sufficient money for healthcare. You guys might not realize this, but we take up $21 billion a year in tax from British Columbians and another about $22 billion in other revenues in that. That should be sufficient to pay for everything. For some reason it isn't.
Thank you, Mr. Horn.
Well, I think all of these things are important, but I'll actually agree with Shane on this, and that is without building our economy and creating additional revenue. If we simply take what's there and try to shuffle it around all the time, which is what the NDP's plan is, you never get ahead. And the difficulty is we can only by building the economy, only by creating new jobs, only by creating a larger pie, do we have the money to be able to spend more on healthcare, more on education, more on transportation, and really achieve the dreams that we all have. And that's what's important for British Columbians, and that's really the route that we need to move forward on.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson.
The platform is fully laid out. $2 billion also includes a good chunk of reallocation of money that Liberals have misspent. So let's get the record straight. We would say education first, because education leads to jobs. Our education system has been hurt dramatically over the last 12 years, so much so that class sizes are far too large. Teachers are being laid off, and special needs kids are not getting the work that they need. So we would go education first, jobs second, healthcare third, probably.
Thank you. Back to transportation. And Mr. Kennedy, you'll respond first. The long-standing dispute between Coquitlam and New Westminster over the United Boulevard, Braid Street Connector, or Bailey Bridge, seems to have no resolution in sight. What plans or positions does your party have to help solve this dispute?
It's really hard to kind of comment on a high for, but I'm going to come down hard on the side of Coquitlam. I think Richard Stewart's correct in assessment about how we're going to have to handle this problem.
Mr. Horn.
I think this is an issue that really faces us all. It's important. We need this better routes of transportation within our region. And one of the things that I think it impacts us the most on is the Royal Columbian Hospital. It really, there's a bottleneck for us in this region to get to the Royal Columbian Hospital. The fact that we don't have a Bailey Bridge, or we have a one-lane Greater Bailey Bridge there, I think just compounds that. And I think if we had the federal dollars there to actually make that a reality, to have a new bridge there, and the city of New Westminster refused to move forward on that. I think this is a very important thing, not only for Coquitlam, but our region, and it's something that we need to make sure happens.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson.
I think it's a very difficult issue, and it's not necessarily something that either city has control over. We might want a bridge in Coquitlam really badly. All that traffic's going into New Westminster. And there was also talk about a 6-lane Patella Bridge going into New Westminster. So it's a very, very complicated issue. One of the reasons we're in this situation is because public transit has been so poorly funded over the years that we have far too many cars on the road. And if we had a better funded transit system, we may not be in such a precarious situation with this bridge. I think we need more consultation, and we need to work with New Westminster to try to find a solution. But for somebody to sit there and impose a solution on New Westminster, I don't think is really the way to go.
Thank you, Mr. Geddes.
I'm no micromanager either. I don't know how to solve a specific problem like this, but who would have thunk it? Two governments can't make an agreement.
Thank you. We're going to move to post-secondary education. Mr. Horn, you'll respond to this first. On February 28, 2012, the presidents of 25 provincial post-secondary schools, including those at UBC, SFU, Douglas College, and BCIT, wrote a letter to Advanced Education Minister Naomi Yamamoto expressing concern over $70 million in cuts slated to come into effect between 2013 and 2015 to institutional grants. And these grants, combined with unfunded inflationary pressures, have placed an inordinate strain on the operations of these institutions, leading to cuts in services and programs. This is at a time when the province faces a critical skills shortage in 2013. So, Mr. Horn and others, how does your party plan to adequately fund post-secondary institutions and address the looming skills shortage?
We've, unlike the NDP in the 1990s that froze tuitions and basically didn't do anything for post-secondary education, we've actually expanded the number of post-secondary seats dramatically in the time that we've been in government. Here at Douglas College, for example, we now have more nursing spaces than we've ever had. We've doubled the number of nurses that we're training in the province of British Columbia. We've doubled the number of doctors we're training in the province of British Columbia. We're dealing with the skills that we actually require in order to deal with healthcare and other issues. And, apprentices is another discussion that's had quite a bit. We have more than double, we graduate more than double of the number of apprentices that we did even 5 years ago. So, skills training and making certain that we have the people necessary to take the jobs that we're creating is extremely important to the economy of British Columbia. It's something that we work very, very diligently on.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson.
We've announced that we would add to the post-secondary budgets, as well as bring back the needs-based grant program that used to be there. That's what we were talking about with the corporate tax on banks. There is a severe skill shortage. We need to do more. This is, again, just like public school education, this is the foundation of our economy, and we can't keep underfunding post-secondary education. We're making it harder and harder for families to be able to afford post-secondary education, and there's lots of students that just can't stay in school because it's so expensive. So it's not all about fees, but we just need to do a lot more to make sure that there's enough spaces for students that are looking to be trained. enough spaces in the types of professions that we're needing people to be trained for, and that's what's in our platform.
Thank you, Mr. Geddes.
Higher education is very expensive and very, very inefficient. I know that because I'm a teacher at a university, a private one, thankfully. And my daughter is also attending UBC. Now, I don't expect you to pay for her fees. I don't understand why you want to do this. Most of the benefits of the university education go to the people who get that degree. They should be able to go out there and get the wherewithal to get it themselves. If you give someone a free lunch, they'll take advantage of it and they'll use it inappropriately. So don't ask the taxpayers to pay for other people's higher incomes in their lives. It just doesn't make sense. It's not, especially not fair to those people who don't go to university.
Thank you, Mr. Kennedy.
John Cummings has made it very clear that we would reinstate those $70 million worth of grants. You can't develop a resource sector or any trades without training. And you're going to have people say, well, where's the money going to come from? I look at simply just off the top of my head, I can come up with the money right here. $65 million in advertising, $50 million to the Pacific Carbon Trust, $9 million to PAVCO, which is interesting because a couple of the people who are Liberal candidates actually sit on boards of PAVCO. I know myself, my own son, he'll be attending post-secondary this year, and it's quite a sticker shock when you see the price. I know Mr. Getty says we don't want to go and pay for someone else's children, but you have to realize it makes for a better society, so it is an expense that helps society. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. Oh, sorry. Turn pages. I lost my place. Most of the party platforms identify the needs for nurses in healthcare. What will you or your party do to ensure other healthcare providers, such as allied health professionals, physicians, and specialists? There are massive shortages in many disciplines, but all we hear about are the nurses.
We've talked a lot about expanding home care, expanding care in the community. We've talked a lot about creating multidisciplinary clinics within communities so that people aren't using the hospitals as much. We're not taking up valuable spaces in the hospitals. We've also talked about better seniors care, better care homes so that seniors aren't taking up space in acute beds. All those things will require a variety of medical professionals, and we think at a time where our population is aging, more and more care is needed. We need to be creative, we need to be efficient, and we need to do things differently. So we think that there's room for all of those types of professions in our plan.
Thank you, Mr. Geddes.
Imagine a government in between you and the service you want to buy. And you're not allowed to talk to the people who provide the service. You have to go through the government, and the government negotiates and set the prices for them and the hours for those guys. This doesn't work. You can't get the appropriate service that you want. Some of you probably have your family doctor who can't telephone you at home unless, out of the goodness of his heart, he's willing to do so, because he doesn't get paid for that because it's not in the government contract. And I know that the government doesn't want to put it in the contract because that will cost taxpayers too much money. Meanwhile, there are people that are willing to pay for this, and their doctors are willing to provide this service. That's the same with every other type of health profession. This government in-between person, middleman, doesn't work. It doesn't give us the service we want. We need to have more open deregulation of medical services so we can get the appropriate service at the appropriate prices.
Thank you, Mr. Kennedy.
I might be speaking heresy here, but I think part of the problem is actually wages in terms of medical professionals. It's very difficult to retain people when you're actually some of the lower paid end of the scale in Canada. So it sounds like I'm saying bite the bullet, but I'm afraid that's one of the problems we have to look at. Overall spending as well too. Mr. Wilson mentioned home care. He mentioned some of the reviews of acute care, things like that. Last month, I think or 2 months ago, the province was running a series talking about all the issues within healthcare. People were wasting money. Those are some of the things that John Cummings and myself as BC Conservatives would like to see reviewed.
Mr. Horn.
Well, as I answered the last question, it's about making certain that we train the professionals that we need. And as I said, we're now training more than double the number of nurses that we did 10 years ago. We're training more than double the number of doctors that we did 10 years ago. We have more spaces for specialty physicians, and really it goes problem. If you don't train the individuals, you won't have them to serve. And you know, in the 1990s, we ran through a huge, long period where we didn't train the number of people that we needed, and that's why we ended up in the shortages and the difficulties that we were in the early 2000s until we started training some people. We're now catching up, but we're not quite there yet. And quite frankly, it's one of the difficulties with the choice that we have before us now.
Thank you. So to all candidates, Mr. Geddes, you're going to respond to this one first. What are your plans for the Riverview lands?
Originally, these were supposedly owned by all of us, but now the people who live in that neighborhood want to keep it as a park for themselves. This is very valuable land that could be used for all kinds of other purposes. Essentially, some loud special interest group has said they want it for themselves. Well, let them buy it. Let them buy it at the appropriate price from the rest of us taxpayers.
Thank you, Mr. Kennedy.
I guess Mr. Geddes is going to stay out of Rocky Point or Como Lake or any other parks because he doesn't pay for them, but I think it should be a park space. It does add to the community, and I think it's important to preserve it.
Thanks, Mr. Horn.
Well, you know, I think this is one of the most difficult parts of the whole debate because people sort of assume it's a park right now, but if you went to set up a picnic basket today, they'd kick you off the property in about 5 or 6 minutes. And, you know, I think this is one of the things about Riverview that's important. I think it should be more of a community space. I think people should be able to go there and enjoy it. I also think that it should be more of a community. When it was first built, it was a community. It was one of the first sort of real communities in this area. And I think we should maintain that. I think we should maintain the park-like setting. I don't think it should be all residential. It should be all commercial. I think that, quite frankly, there should be a significant healthcare component on the site. And quite frankly, I think we should work together as a community and really make Riverview a very, very special place like it is and once was, and really make it and revitalize it.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson.
For the most part, I agree with Mr. Horn. And I think we really need to make sure we consult with Coquitlam because Coquitlam is situated in Coquitlam and Coquitlam has to say over what happens with it. But for the most part, you know, we need to figure out a way to keep it operating in some way. It may not be in the same fashion it was used over the years. Might need to be repurposed for some other type of healthcare or maybe an education facility or something like that. Maybe not all of the buildings can be saved, but a good chunk of that place can be saved and can be repurposed and can be used in a very well thought out way. But it's going to take a lot of work and a lot of consulting and a lot of interaction with professionals in the community. But for the most part, I agree with what Mr. Horn said. I need to say that this is an example of some of the decisions that the Liberal government has been making. It's sort of like shoot first, ask questions later. We need to consult, we need to give it a little bit more thought into what we do before we go ahead and start putting up signs that don't make sense to people. So we think maybe a combination of Maryhill Bypass and 7B, something like that makes sense. But basically, it's more a sense of talking to people, figuring out what needs to be done, and then do it. Connector, as most appropriate use of the money, I would definitely support it. But at this point, I couldn't really give you a solid answer.
Thank you, Mr. Geddes.
Some people want to spend some money, and some people will benefit from it. So instead of asking general taxpayers to pay for this, is there some way to find out who's going to benefit and make them pay for this?
I'll make a closing statement for 2 minutes. We will start the closing statements with Mr. Wilson. You have the floor.
Well, again, I want to thank everybody for coming. You've been awfully quiet. I hope we didn't bore you too much. These are very, very important issues. And I'm sitting down here, but I could just as well be sitting up there with you. I am just like all of you. I'm a regular taxpayer in our community, a small business person. I'm somebody who wants to make a difference in our community. I don't have all the answers, as you discovered tonight, but I'm willing to work my butt off to try to make sure that you get the best representation you can. As I mentioned earlier, I believe in free enterprise. I've been an entrepreneur my whole life, and I feel extremely comfortable with the NDP. We believe in business. We believe in the role a strong economy plays in having strong social programs. And there are a lot of great people, very smart people, very well-intentioned people in this party who want to make a difference in the community. I have an 18-year-old daughter and a 17-year-old son. And I look at the world that we're leaving them and the mess that potentially they could inherit. And I'm ashamed sometimes. And I really think that we need to have a change. We need to start having a bit more of a responsible government, responsible decisions that are best for society, not what's best for special interest groups and large businesses. Thank you very much for coming tonight. I really appreciate your support.